Congreso Internacional de Educación e Inclusión desde el Sur, transformando la gestión escolar en Tierra del Fuego, experiencias y desafíos, se propone como objetivo central reposicionar y jerarquizar el rol y tareas de enseñanza, constituyéndose en una cuestión vertebral de la gestión pública en educación a cualquier escala. Sostener la centralidad de la enseñanza es un desafío para la gestión institucional de las escuelas. Este Congreso ofrece como instancia de cierre de esta mañana la conferencia de Andy Hargreaves. La verdad es que es un honor contar con este destacado referente de educación a nivel internacional en temáticas referidas especialmente a la formación docente, el análisis y la investigación de las prácticas de la enseñanza. La verdad es que es muy difícil sintetizar el enorme recorrido de Andy y fundamentalmente su currículum vitae. Así que haremos simplemente una síntesis para saber ante quién nos encontraremos en unos pocos segundos. Andy Hargreaves nació en Inglaterra, es profesor emérito en el Boston College y tiene cátedras visitantes y honorarias en diversas universidades, particularmente en la de Ottawa, en la Universidad de Hong Kong. Trabajó en diversas organizaciones ministeriales, asesorando a distintos ministerios de educación de distintos países. Es cofundador y presidente de lo que se conoce como ARC, Colaboración de la Cuenca Atlántica, un grupo de naciones y sus ministros y líderes de asociaciones profesionales comprometidos con la excelencia, la equidad, el bienestar, la inclusión, la democracia y los derechos humanos ampliamente definidos en sistemas de gestión profesional. Es miembro electo de la Academia Nacional de Educación de los Estados Unidos, expresidente del Congreso Internacional de Eficacia y Mejora Escolar 2018-2020, ex asesor en educación del primer ministro de Ontario 2015-2018 y actual asesor del primer ministro de Escocia. Y siguen innumerable cantidad de actuaciones. Ha escrito numerosas cantidades de publicaciones, quizás bien vale destacar, porque de eso seguramente vamos a escuchar hoy, su libro Capital Profesional, que hizo en coautoría con Michael Fullan, y la verdad es que hemos leído esa obra y aprendido mucho de la misma. Seguramente, reitero, hoy seremos también destinatarios de una conferencia que va a tener mucho que ver con esta obra que escribió con Michael Fullan. Investigó también en numerosos proyectos de distintos centros y universidades, simplemente destacar uno de ellos, que es la evaluación del desarrollo de la implementación y los resultados preliminares de un marco de política educativa inclusiva en Nueva Escocia, entre sus últimos proyectos. Así que nos sentimos honrados con la presencia de Andy en este Congreso Internacional, y definimos la convocatoria de Andy fundamentalmente por su prolífica trayectoria, el valor de las ideas que sostiene para el eje central de este Congreso, porque resulta de enorme significatividad y aporte a la docencia sus reflexiones que tienen que ver con la relevancia de la construcción de las comunidades docentes como aprendizaje, la relevancia de las comunidades docentes como diferencia en la capacidad de fortalecer la educación y el sistema educativo, transformar a docentes en facilitadores y enseñantes que renueven la apuesta de la escuela para mejorar y enriquecer la experiencia, la vida y aprendizajes de nuestros estudiantes. Así que, sin más, nos zambullimos y tenemos el honor de escuchar a Andy Hargreaves en este séptimo Congreso Internacional, Educación e Inclusión desde el Sur.
Hello, my name is Andy Hargreaves. I am research professor at Boston College in the United States and visiting professor at the University of Ottawa in Canada. I'm speaking from Ottawa now on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe people, one of our indigenous First Nations people. And it's a great honor to be invited to present at your Congress, which spreads out all over the region, has had so many impressive speakers before me, and which really focuses on values of equity and inclusion, a strong teaching profession, and an orientation to positive educational change. It's been a great pleasure for me to be influenced by the work that has gone on in your region over many years. When I was a student, as an undergraduate at university, one of the texts that most inspired me to want to go into education was Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In more recent years, I've had, in the past 30 years or so, opportunities to work in different parts of the region around educational change, teacher education reform, and to engage with educators in many parts of the continent. Some of my books, you probably know, have been translated into Spanish and Espanol. Here is La Cuarta Via, which my colleague Dennis Shirley and I wrote, and was influential apparently in one of the positive educational reform movements with the government of Chile some years ago in the mid 2000s. Some of you will know my book with Michael Fullen, Capital Professional, and Capital Professional is something I'll be talking about today in a little bit more detail. And the follow-on from this, in my work with Michael O'Connor, Professionalismo Colaborativo, includes work from our observations of teacher collaboration in Escuela Nueva. And I also organize and bring together ministers and educational leaders from 8 different countries at the moment every year, committed to human rights in education, around well-being, inclusion, equity, broad excellence, democracy, human rights in a strong teaching profession. And one of our participating countries is the country of Uruguay. So I hope I have had some influence on your thinking and action in the region, because you've certainly had a lot of influence on my thinking and action too, in all the years, the 40, 50 years or so that I've been in public education. Today I want to talk about 2 crises in education all over the world. They're global crises. I want to outline what I think is a good, broad strategic response to those crises around the ideas of professional capital and community. I'd like to talk a bit about some work we've been doing very recently, very concretely and practically, with a national network of schools, getting teachers and schools to work collaboratively in particular ways that support equity and inclusion and well-being, and finish with 2 or 3 particular ideas about how we might best move forward in your region and across the world to create better learning for all our young people and a better experience of teaching for those educators who serve them. So what are these 2 crises? Well, first, since COVID, we've noticed an astonishing increase in absenteeism, student attendance problems all across the world. Students have stopped going to school. There are many reasons for this. People talk about mental health problems. The rates of attendance problems in Uruguay are over 50% of chronic absenteeism. In the UK, the country of my birth, they've gone up by 150%. Data from the US shows it's not just children from poor families who are not going to school, but children from privileged families are deciding to stay home as well and to learn online or be coached by their parents rather than going to public school. What is behind this crisis of absenteeism? Well, you know, when I was a high school student, I was a chronic absentee. I didn't show up much to school for quite some time when I was in my early teens. The reason for that is that I came from a very low income family. My father died when I was 12 years old. My mother struggled on for a couple of years with 3 jobs, cleaning people's houses, working in a local store, looking after people's children. And eventually the burden was too much for her, and she had both a physical and a mental collapse. My brothers worked in factories. They were doing apprenticeships. So much of the responsibility for taking care of the family came down to me when I was a high school student. And in one term, for example, a period of about 4 months, I had 50 registered absences from school because I would get up in the morning, clean the house, light the fire, vacuum, go and buy the food that could be made and cooked later on. And when my grandmother arrived, because we're an extended family, then I could go to school, which would not be until about 11 o'clock in the morning. And from being near the top of my class, I went very quickly to being near the bottom of my class. And it took many weeks before eventually someone showed up in my home to find out what the problem was. And of course, many problems of absenteeism are sometimes difficulties in the home, a lack of support, teenagers having to take care of parents or younger brothers or sisters, just like my situation. But the truth is was I really all that excited about going back to school when I could? Well, the curriculum was dull. It had no connection to my working class life. And if I could spend another half an hour or so at home rather than being in school, then I would choose that. So the school was as much responsible for absenteeism as I was, and as my family was, or my circumstances. And you know, what we're seeing in many governments' response to absenteeism is they focus on the child or their mental health, or they focus on the family and the support that there is for the child. But very rarely do they focus on the curriculum or the teaching, on what it is that draws children in to wanting to come to school. And the thing is about the COVID-19 pandemic, it disrupted all the routines and all the habits that people had got into about every morning you get up, you go to school, you come home, you do your homework, you get up next day, you go back to school. Whether it's a good school or a bad school, a subject you like or a subject you don't, the routine and the habit is the same. And COVID broke that habit when children were trapped at home, away from school, online, doing other things, disconnected from the people around them. And so now many young people are saying, do I really need to go to school? Sometimes they're going to school to meet their friends, but they're not going into classes to engage with their lessons and their learning. COVID broke the habit of schooling, and we, as educators, are part of the solution, or should be, about how to bring those people back. We can't assume anymore they will come automatically. We have to win their engagement, win their trust, and win their loyalty. That's the first crisis. What's the second one? Well, in some ways, it's very similar. There's a global crisis of teacher recruitment and teacher retention. At the United Nations General Assembly in 2 years ago in New York, September in New York of 2022, the Secretary General, Gutierrez, declared at the very end that in response to the global crisis in the teaching profession, he would establish a global commission on the future of the teaching profession, composed of 17 ex-ministers and teacher union leaders, many of them actually from the global south, not just from the OECD countries, but from the global south as well as the global north. These ministers and union leaders met on several occasions, and they commissioned 6 expert papers to help inform their judgments. And I was asked to write one of those 6 expert papers. The other papers, which informed many of the 59 recommendations, talked about things to improve the attractiveness of teaching that we've talked about for years, all of them valid. Increasing the pay of teachers to attract better candidates, and to ensure that teachers didn't have to work 2 or 3 jobs in order to make a living and to be able to feed and support their families. People talked about the status of teaching, showing teachers more respect in politics and in the media. And they talked about workload, the amount of bureaucracy or form filling, or unwanted work, not just the amount of work, but unwanted work that teachers were trapped in doing. All these things have been said for years, and they are said again in the 59 recommendations of the report. What I added to this was something additional, and that is, just as if we want young people to come back to school, we need to change how the learning feels. If we want teachers to come into teaching and to stay in teaching, we need to change how the teaching feels, so that the teaching and learning is as exciting and engaging and as innovative and as purposeful for the teacher as it is for the student. And that we need to remove the obstacles that are getting in the way of that kind of teaching, the kind of teaching that for Paulo Freire was the opposite of banking education, the things that are getting in the way of that kind of inspiring teaching being able to happen for young people. So these are the 2 crises. They're the same crises. Children questioned whether they needed to go to school. Workers questioned whether they needed to go to work or do the same jobs. And teachers, as some of those workers, asked the same question too. Is this a job, the way it is defined and structured, that I need to continue as a habit? Or do I need to recommit to it in some way so that it can draw me in? These are the 2 crises. What are the answers? Well, in 2012, Michael Fullen and I, drawing on years of work we'd done together with teachers and leaders and educational change, came up with one idea, 2 words, and 3 components to try and describe this. It's an original idea, not just in education, but in social science in the world. And that is the idea, 2 words, of capital professional, or in English, professional capital. The idea of professional capital is really quite simple, and that is, if you want to get a return on anything, you have to make an investment. This is true of financial capital, but it's also true of the capital of investing in human beings. So, how should we invest in people in the teaching profession so that they want to come to it, and so that they want to progress when they're there, and so they want to stay in the education profession, perhaps as a teacher, perhaps as a teacher educator, perhaps as a researcher, perhaps as a policymaker, but they want to stay in education somehow for the rest of their adult careers and professional lives. Well, professional capital, we said, has three components. The one that governments tend to talk about a lot is human capital. Human capital is the capital we have as individuals. Our skills, our qualifications, our emotional intelligence, and ability to connect with our young people. And so there was a lot of effort in policy in many parts of the world, including funded by the World Bank. How could they boost human capital? And their strategies were, for a while, to bring young people into teaching at low cost, have them there for 3 or 4 years while they have a lot of energy, and then enable them to move on somewhere else afterwards and replace them with more young people who are energetic and inexpensive and frankly will do as they're told. They're easy to manage and they're easy to control. This was the human capital argument. But the human capital argument missed two other key dimensions of professional capital, which might explain why no governments really, even though many educators, no governments have taken up this concept strategically. And the second is decision-making capital. It's the capital that's really about judgment, about expertise. So, how do you become a great teacher? Most people are not already great teachers or great anything the moment they start. You need time. You need support. You need to experience different kinds of situations. You need to engage with professional learning. You need to experience good leadership. This experience over time in any profession, teaching, medicine, engineering, is what develops your professional judgment, your ability to make decisions in complicated situations that do not have automatic answers. And so for this to happen, teachers need to stay in teaching and educators in education for longer periods of time. It's no good coming for 3 years and then going and then have another group for another 3 years and so on. Teachers need to stay around. They need to practice so they become more perfect. And they need to develop a greater repertoire of judgments and strategies by trying out different classes, different subjects, different kinds of schools, different ages of children, for example, different kinds of children. So decision-making capital is the second, and for that you have to invest in people over time, and the cost of that increases. There is just no getting away from it at all. And the third kind of capital, and arguably the most important, is social capital. Social capital is the capital we have together when we are a community. It is how we support each other emotionally when we're having difficulties or struggling. It's how we learn from each other cognitively by looking at each other's practice, or discussing new ideas, or engaging in professional learning as a group and not just as an individual. And Michael Fullen and I researched a lot of studies, including our own, and it remains true, just as it did with the inventors of the concept of social capital, that it adds value to individual human capital. You will become a better teacher simply because of who the people are around you and how they work together. And you will become a worse teacher simply by who the people are around you and how they don't work together. So social capital, or what we call now professional collaboration, or professional community, or this concept that Michael O'Connor and I talked about, professionalismo colaborativo, is the essence of really where the best investment is that we can make. Not in teachers who come and go, not in technology or artificial intelligence that tries to replace teachers, because the work of teaching is not just cognitive, it is emotional, it is moral, it is spiritual. It's about knowing and understanding people as well as knowing and understanding ideas, information, and content. And there is no shortcut to investing in people over time and investing in people as a community. So this is the key of professional capital and social capital. But not any kind of collaboration is always effective. Sometimes when people collaborate, they simply talk. They simply share ideas. They simply talk about their practice. But nothing necessarily happens as a result of it. Collaboration is best when people labor, when they labor together, when they work together, when they do something together. So the examples we describe in this book, for example, are about collaborative planning, or lesson study where you observe and give feedback on each other's lessons, or looking at how you assess students' work together. And one particular way that is especially productive in which teachers can collaborate effectively is when they engage in innovation together, in creating new pedagogies, new curriculum, new courses of study, new ways of teaching and learning that can help the students who are most marginalized, most oppressed, who struggle most within our schools. So we need to think about how teachers don't just plan or talk or meet, but how they can engage in exciting projects together to develop innovations that suit the students they know best within their own schools. Those students may be indigenous, or they may be second language, or they may be migrants, or they may be poor or second language, or they may be LGBTQ, as we say in North American countries, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and so on. So they can be marginalized in all kinds of ways. And the point about innovation is not just innovations for their own sake, but innovations for these particular groups. So based on all this research that I've been involved in before with different co-researchers on how to improve teaching through collaboration, and also the research I'd done with my colleague Dennis Shirley on how to improve students' well-being and how to engage with their different identities and how to enhance how well they engage with their learning. So engagement for students and engagement for their teachers. On the basis of this, my colleagues and I at the University of Ottawa managed to get a $2.5 million grant just after COVID from the Lego Foundation in Denmark to help young people aged about 12, 13 years old after COVID-19 who were particularly vulnerable, poor, low income, recent immigrants, First Nations, Indigenous, for example. And then to create a network of schools where teams of teachers in each of those schools, teams of 4 teachers, sometimes involving a principal but often not, would design innovations for their students to engage them with their learning and improve their mental health or well-being. And they chose 4 different kinds of innovations: screen-based, digital, machine-based, might be robotics, but might be wood or cardboard or metal, green-based, which is outdoor learning in the jungle, in the environment, learning on the land, for example, or everything in between, other kinds of learning, for example, around inclusion or social studies. So schools could choose what they focused on. They had a lot of latitude. Sometimes they focused on all of these. But they did this as teams of teachers together. And what we found was 2 things. That these projects, first of all, really engaging for the students. So we found students who were chronic absentees, and the only day they would come into school was when the project was on in the school. And they had skills to contribute to the project. Sometimes these were working class skills, the skills of making things, of constructing and of building things, for example. Sometimes these were indigenous skills of building things outdoors or connecting with the land or the water, for instance. But the absentees who would not come in for the rest of the curriculum would come in for the curriculum that particularly was engaging for them. And we had all kinds of projects: gardening projects, cooking projects, building projects, water quality, filtering water quality in indigenous communities projects, building a cardboard arcade of games with electronic gizmos and then showing it to the community, making plays, doing theatre, filming it on green screen, editing it, learning coding, and presenting that to the community. These teams they just had tiny bits of money from the project, a few $1,000s for a whole year. But then we connected them with each other in person and also online, virtually, once or twice or 3 times a year. These projects were not only engaging for the students, they were engaging for the teachers. In 3 of the schools, what they did was every Friday for half a day or a day, they would offer classes based not on the students' interests, but on the teachers' interests. Things like cooking or knitting or magic tricks or Minecraft or chess, all kinds of things that the teachers did not normally get to teach. They were very excited about, and children would sign up for these projects and be as excited as their teachers were. So, but even in the other projects that were not like this, the teachers found that they learned that their children were capable of doing things they never imagined they were capable of learning. And this was so exciting for the teachers as well as it was for the children. So what I've tried to go through with you today is that if we want to solve the crisis of absenteeism, And we want to solve the crisis of teacher recruitment and retention. We have to change how the learning feels, and we have to change how the teaching feels. We have to change both of these things to draw our teachers and our students into schools. And the answer to that is not by just having young teachers who come and go, nor is it through artificial intelligence, although artificial intelligence can help us a lot, make some jobs easier, like assessment or like curriculum planning. It can help us create frameworks for planning our own curriculum. So it can help, but it can't do the emotional work, the inspirational work, the spiritual work, the moral work that teachers do every day with the children that they know best. So what can we do strategically, just to close now, to make the kinds of things happen that I've been describing to you? Well, I'll say three things. First is, we have to talk up teaching rather than talk it down. We have to sell it as a secure profession that has a passion, that makes a difference, that is about public service. And we must begin with the students in our own classes, with the students in our schools. We probably need to talk up business and entrepreneurship a little bit less, and talk up teaching and public service a little bit more, beginning with the children that we teach. That is the first. And then we need to do that in our communities, with our parents, with our own children. We need to do that. We need to do it in the media, and we need to do it in politics. We need to give teaching a much more positive spin, and not have children believe that their futures lie only in law or business or being an Instagram star or an instant tech brother entrepreneur in somewhere like Silicon Valley. We need to renew a strong image of teaching. That's the first. The second is, we need money to do this. The World Bank will do anything other than support countries that want to increase teachers' salaries. But you know, the tide is changing. Half the world's wealth is owned by 26 people. The president of Brazil is leading a global campaign to tax extreme wealth, even just a little bit, to release money for public service, public good, and public life. Government after government is now at least beginning to talk about taxing billionaires, even just a little bit, to release money into the public sector. And that must be part of our campaign. And we need to pressurize the World Bank to change its policies in these areas as well. But the signs are this is beginning to happen, that the world is starting to change in how we think about this. And the last thing we can do is to introduce in the curriculum more freedom for teachers and more freedom for students. Not individual freedom, but freedom to learn together in ways that are engaging, exciting, purposeful, and rigorous, all at the same time. So we need less standardization, less testing, less bureaucracy, less top-down control, but more freedom from the bureaucracy, yet less freedom from each other. It's what Michael Fullan and I call collective autonomy. So these two crises, they're the same. We've broken the habit of schooling. We need to draw people in. Professional capital is the key way to think about that, not individual human capital. And the strongest of these is social capital, the capital that we have together. the best way to work together is not just by talking about things, but by doing things together. And the best way we can pursue that is through collaborative innovation for the students we know best in the schools and communities where we work. Thank you for listening. I'm very sorry I can't be with you, but I'm sure you're going to have a fantastic conference for the rest of the time you're engaged with it. Bye-bye.